All right. How's the royal family? I pray that everyone is doing well, and it is an honor to have Dr. Rick Wallace. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It's an honor to have you. And I want to say to the mods, I'm going to send out a few links, and would y'all periodically send them out over and over? That would be helpful too as well. So we're going to get started with interviewing Dr. Rick Wallace. And I'm always going to give Lisa Cabrera the honors to ask the first question, and we're going to continue on from there.
Welcome to the panel, Dr. Rick Wallace. It is a pleasure having you here. I have to say, just as I told you a few days ago, I have been one of your subscribers, and I have enjoyed your video for quite some time. I really enjoy how you bring out a wide variety of topics, but let's try to get to know who Rick Wallace, PhD, really is. Where did you grow up, and how did you become the man that you are today?
I grew up on the northeast side of Houston, Texas. The second part of the question is quite easy, at least from where I'm sitting. Through a course of situations and circumstances, I ended up being taken by my great-grandparents, my mother's parents, when I was 9 months old, and they adopted me and reared me. So I was literally reared by my great-grandparents, and they brought a lot of old values. But the thing that probably was most emphatic was simply having a man's man, modeling manhood in every way that I sort of try to translate it to younger guys today. It was modeled for me. My grandfather, when dealing with me, up until I became a teenager and got in high school, he became more vocal at that point, and that's where the life lessons were taught. But before that, it was just simply sitting back and watching him. He didn't do a whole lot of this is what men do, this is what men don't do. He didn't do that. He just stood up and I watched him. And then when I got to the point where he saw me fighting to get into manhood at about 15, 16, he set me down and he started explaining what I had observed and the principles associated with it. And then that just stuck with me. And still today, my measure is based off of my potential and the standard he set.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Excuse me, Dr. Wallace. The question that I wanted to ask you is, what inspired you to become a psychologist?
Actually, I've always been interested in the world of psychology in certain elements. But what actually sold me on it was my 11th grade year. I was watching the Phil Donahue show, and Dr. Francis Cress Welsing was on there. And I'm pretty sure you guys remember, this is 1985. So this is directly off the heels of a movement in which they were pushing Black inferiority, Black intellectual inferiority. And here we are on this show where this Black scholar and psychiatrist is bringing the pain and more than holding her own with her white contemporaries on this show. And so I became enamored with her, started following her, came in, basically through her, found Neely Fuller Jr. And from there, Dr. Clark, Dr. Benyakinen, and Dr. Naeem Akbar, and on Dr. Amos Wilson, and on down the line. So there's all of these people, and like with Dr. Wilson and Dr. Akbar, again, people who encouraged me to say, okay, let's pursue this. And it was really just wanting to do that. And a great deal of what I was able to do was basically as an autodidact.
Okay. Well, Dr. Rick Wallace, I noticed that you have quite a big range of different books that you have published over the years. And one thing I do like is you have many things in there geared towards education, financial freedom, health. So, you have a very wide range of knowledge from what I see. But one of the things I want to touch on, and this is one thing I observed from when my son was in school. When my son was in school, he had, the white female teachers, and I didn't get along so well with a few of them. And that is what kind of encouraged me to homeschool. But one thing I did notice while he was in school, several of the Black boys in the classroom were removed and placed into special education. And this was all by the request of this white female teacher that they had. And I see you have a publication out about special education as a socioeconomic weapon. What are your comments on that?
Man, that's something I can literally talk about all day. It's one of my passions. Basically, the public education system, first of all, isn't designed, even for white students, it isn't designed to properly prepare a person to go out and maximize their potential in their own gifting and their own talent. It's designed to supply literate people to corporations and big businesses that can be easily trained and plugged in. But when you start to look at the dynamic as it applies to African American children, there are other nefarious mechanisms that work against us. And when it comes to the Black male, it's multiplied times 10. And so you have a situation in which 70+% of teachers in the public education system are white middle class women. And there seems to be this inherent fear of young Black boys, even at the age of 5, 6, and 7. Then you have a situation where, number one, they don't understand culturally the behavior of young Black boys. They don't understand the history and the heritage of young Black boys and what leads to certain behaviors. And so it's easy for them to label. They have no training in the area of psychology to make these type of assessments, but they're referring these kids for oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD, mild mental retardation, and a number of other categories that would basically assign to them a tag for special education. Well, there's a number of elements. First, there's a financial element involved. There's financial motivation. This is why a great deal of these boys who are referred are literally tagged with ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, because there's a financial motivator. When you have a child who is classified as a special education student, that normally doubles what the government pays the district to educate that child. However, that money is rarely actually funneled into educating special education kids. This is where most schools get their funding for sports, new uniforms, training trips, new weight room. All of that stuff normally comes out of all of this extra money of kids being funneled into special education. And so I wrote a position paper on the disproportionality of Black males being referred into special education. And so you've got this financial dynamic that's motivating them. And then you have this misunderstanding and the fear of young Black males, which creates a process in which Black males are alienated from the school process or the educational process and ultimately end up dropping out before they graduate, which increases the risk of incarceration.
Right. Now, I have another question for you. Now, my solution was getting my son out and just educating him myself. What do you recommend for parents in this situation where they're recommending special education for their child? What recourse do those parents have that are opposed to that kind of situation?
First and foremost, they cannot assess your child without your permission. So they can refer all they want to, but if you don't sign off on it, they cannot assess them and apply them that tag. So that's the first line of recourse that you have is that you don't have to sign off on it. And what I would suggest to any parent that gets that notice that we want to test your child or assess, have our school psychologists assess your child for A, B, C, D, or E, is to take your child yourself to an independent, non-biased child psychologist and have them evaluate the child and run test scores and whatever battery of tests they run in order to determine where that child is on the spectrum. And then you use that to decide whether you even want to invite the school into the process. No, we're fine. He's going to be okay. The second recourse is if you find that your child is struggling and that there's no reason to believe that they are suffering from any of these tags, then you may need to pull them out. One of the biggest issues we have with educating our children is we force them into a standardized system that judges them based on this standardized curriculum of learning. And children are individuals. How children learn is unique. Every children has a different way of engaging and understanding and learning. And we shut that down early on. Even sitting still for hours at a time is not the best way for a child to learn. Children learn by engaging. Children learn by being actively involved in something. I
agree.
And so when you shut that down, you close down a great deal of their capacity. And so, and then when you get to young Black males, these are going to be the most, for a lack of a better term, hyper kids there are. And there are a number of reasons for that. But if you aren't a person who's familiar with the culture and understand what's going on in most, especially in most inner cities, then you're not going to understand the behavior, and you're going to automatically want to assign a negative tag to it because he won't sit down and listen to you the way you want him to, something's wrong with it. Well, actually not. He's actually being more of a kid than the other kids who are sitting down and who have adapted to whatever your demands are. And that doesn't make him, oppositionally defiant. It just means that, hey, that's where he's at. You're supposed to ask questions. You're supposed to challenge things, but right. That's not what they're teaching. So you first of all get an outside opinion before you ever sign anything. Second of all, you may have to consider homeschooling or, becoming a part of a homeschooling community where children are being homeschooled privately, even if you're not doing the homeschooling. And there's a growing group of that. Finally, if you decide I can't homeschool, but I'm going to leave my kid in, I would say contact me or someone who's capable of doing this. What I've done before is work with parents and create what we call an African American Parent Advisory Council that works in direct relation with the school district upper echelons, from the superintendent, vice superintendent, district CEO, and things of that nature. And what you do is you set a standard of what you expect from the district and how they deal with your kid. And you hold them accountable. And the threat that you have is you are a unified body of parents that if you're not satisfied, the parents will vote. And if the vote is to remove, all kids come out. Right. Now that's leverage because that's a financial sanction.
That's right.
And so that's leverage, and they'll try to work with you, but you've got to be willing to do what you say you're going to do. But there's always recourse. The biggest one to me is never sign anything that gives them the reason, because once you sign it, it takes a lot to reverse it.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I agree. Let me turn this over to you, Queen, because I can ask a million more questions.
No problem, Lisa. No problem. No problem. I'm learning a lot. The question that I wanted to ask, because since we're going in that direction right now, is, to me, it seems like, well, not seems like, it is true. You're going into a battlefield because you're dealing with white people who want to rule and reign over our children. And I just see it damn near impossible. How can you step in? You know what's going on. You know the culture, you've lived it and everything. And it seems like there's no other recourse but to pull our babies up out of these schools and stuff. Because I have a lot of subs that homeschool. It was astounding to me. But the question that I want to ask is, I'm gonna go sort of the direction that Dr. Press Welsing was talking about. I want to know, because you getting firsthand of it, the psychological damages of racism on our children, how it's really affecting them in learning, adjusting in society. You get a firsthand of that. I like to hear about that.
Okay, what you have to understand, first of all, is backing up a little bit, is the reasoning and the rationale that leads to us putting our children in public education in the first place. Especially understanding the knowledge that we have of our history in engaging this system. It's and I don't think that people actually think this way, but this is the way that we've got to train ourselves to think. In essence, we're asking our enemy, who has proven over 400 years through successions of different mechanisms and different names, held us in check and exploited and used us for different means. And we're asking them to effectively train our children to be able to compete with theirs. And when you think about it, that's not going to happen. It's just naturally not going to happen. Even if you're sitting up saying the catchphrase of the week, "I'm not racist," there is a subconscious level that says I'm protecting the future of my kids, that will have you view kids who look like your kids differently than those that don't. Now, here's the psychology of it. The system is set up to recognize a certain group as being intellectually superior. And they do that primarily through IQ tests, which is supposed to, IQ tests are supposed to measure your intellect, not how smart you are, but your ability to resolve issues on a number of different spectrums. But one of the categories in the IQ test is comprehension and communication, and which includes vocabulary. Well, if you're operating in a European system, it's obvious that Europeans are probably going to have a greater command of a European vocabulary, and that they're going to probably be able to reason and conversate on that level, whereas a black kid may not. A black kid is probably going to be more versed in what we call ebonics. Now, the truth is, they can both communicate on a certain level, and in many ways, the black kid may be more effective in communicating through the vocabulary that they have. Anything that you can sit up and teach yourself is not a part of the intelligence equation or quotient. It's a part of the learning ability. But what they always talk about is the 15 points on average that white kids score higher than black kids in IQ tests. Well, that type of mindset, that type of narrative is written all across the world. It's not just in IQ. It's a constantly preached narrative that white kids are smarter. So then that creates an inferiority complex, which is already being preached even in the home. Everything from colorism to external and pulchritudinal ideas of what beauty is definitely predominantly produced and presented from a European perspective. And what really gets me, though, if you flip it and actually look at it, while they're telling us our features aren't beautiful, they consistently try to emulate them. But we're not seeing what they're doing, we're hearing what they're saying. And that's being preached to us. You've seen the study, and they've recently redone that study, the doll study, where they asked kids about dolls, and kids automatically chose the white doll as being more beautiful, more smarter, more acceptable, and everybody aspired to it. And they even would say that the black doll is ugly. Then you've got to ask where that's coming from. Yes, it's in every part. It's intertwined into the fabric of the culture on a grand level. You can't miss it. It's present everywhere you go. But it's also present in a school environment in which the teachers are predominantly white, and they are given a position of authority. When you are a child growing up, you have what you call label givers, which help you develop a sense of self and identity, self-image. So your self-image is powerful. Why? Because once I have a self-image, my natural human instincts and determination on a subconscious level is to practice behavior that aligns with how I see myself. That's why I tell parents, never tell your kid they're dumb. Never tell your kid that they're never going to amount to anything. If you have a negative opinion of their father or their mother, don't tell them you're going to be like your dad or your mom, especially if they know that's a negative opinion that you carry of them, because they are going to give your word a great deal of gravity because you are the most powerful person in a position of authority in their lives. The parent holds the number one, what I call label giver. The parent holds the number one label giving position. But guess who holds the number two label giving position in the way of authority and power and emphasis? Teachers. You go from home to school, you spend 8 hours in a room, especially in the early years, one teacher that has this unbelievable sense of authority. They're your parent away from home. And now they are constantly either subliminally or subtly sending a message to you that you're not as good as little Johnny. And so subconsciously, you desire to be little Johnny. Well, what that creates is self-hatred. And if you can't love yourself, you can't love your people, and you can never, ever stand up and defend what's purest to you, and that's self. And so when you constantly send children to schools that marginalize who they are, that give them a false narrative of their own history, and that prop up another group with false narratives and make them seem pure and excellent and exalted, you're constantly tearing down the psyche of a child. And then you're going to, at some point between 18 and 24, ask that child to go out into a world that's hostile towards them and perform.
Right. I agree with that. And I'm glad you said that. One of the things that influenced me about racism were teachers, like you said, and a lot of it was being in front of the television where whiteness is constantly glorified on a 24-hour cycle. Now, when it came down to my own son, one thing I made myself do when I had him was take the TV away. And I notice now that he's not being influenced by that. He is willing to believe he is smart. He is capable. There is not anything constantly in his face saying that, no, you're not as good as white Johnny over here. I did that deliberately. And I see, compared to me at that same age, he's very different, because he doesn't have those same kind of influences that I had.
Right.
One question I do have for you. Our Black children are now, because of social media and other ways that media is delivered now in this day and age, are constantly exposed to the way there are disparities between how we're treated by cops and how white folks are treated by cops. As young men and women that are still looking at that and they know something's wrong, they know why do they hate us, but they're nice to them. What advice would you give to young people when it comes down to policing in America?
Well, it's somewhat complex, but it's something that I'm in a position to do quite often with the Black Man Lead, and then the work we do with young girls in the Music is Life program, as well as in the restoration of ghettos' forgotten daughters. It's about, first of all, understanding your history. See, history is where self-awareness originates, and when you have history taught in an accurate environment, in an accurate way, then you're explaining processes that are not being. See, it is difficult if you don't know the history of Europeans and their encroachment upon land that they did not own and lied and said they discovered, and what they did to those people when they encountered them, and then how they ended up handling us. When you don't understand that, when that's not really truly understood, when it's kind of glossed over, we had this period of about 246 years where we had slaves, and we kind of realized, hey, this probably isn't the best way to do things, and we kind of just walked away from it. And our moral turpitude rose to the occasion, and we decided we're better than that, so we're going to free the slaves. And then we went on and we gave them every opportunity to get ahead and catch up with us from a socioeconomic perspective. And that's the kind of idea you get when you sit up and you're constantly telling people that they need to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. But we're not looking at the economic mechanisms in place that hold them back. See, it's hard for a child to sit up and look at that and understand, basically why they feel that way about me. But when you go back and you teach them their history, and you teach them the history of the people that they're in direct opposition with, and they're able to see that behavior, then it's easier for them to understand. Then you have to teach them how to carry themselves. And one of the things that I was taught at a young age, and one of the things I tell young boys, don't engage in incite conflict in which you're most likely not going to win. You've got to know when to hold. And I know as a man, especially men, see, that's one of the things people don't understand about the behavior of the black male, especially the young black male, is in an environment where the one thing that a man needs to feel is powerful. He needs to feel powerful. And in an environment where you get to experience very little power, you see a lot of dysfunction in the way we carry ourselves. There's a lot of acting out. There's a lot of explosive behavior because you're trying to find a way to get something that you haven't been able to experience. But what you have to tell them is, look, when you can't win, you've got to know when to fold them. You've got to know how to respond to things. You've got to remain calm. There's a saying that says that sometimes you just need to chill and live to fight another day. And so that's something we teach them. We teach them respect. We respect the uniform even when the person who's wearing it isn't living up to their responsibility to serve and protect. And then you've got to be honest with them and point to the fact that a great deal of these men who are going to be hostile towards you wouldn't like you no matter what they were wearing. It's not the cop. The cop, being a cop, just gives them a license to treat you the way they would treat you any other way. So ultimately, I tell them that the cops who are going to treat them less than are simply people who would have in a previous time lynched them. And you've got to understand what you're dealing with, because now they are sanctioned to do this, because we are still not at a point where we are holding police accountable. And so it's an ongoing thing. It's a developmental process. It's not a one-time answer. It's a constant thing. We probably deal with that, with the exception of teaching these young boys how to treat Black women, dealing with a hostile society led by rogue police officers is probably second along in the line.
You know what? I agree with that. But, Dr. Rick, I also hold lawmakers accountable for knowing what the conditions are in this country, and it's never addressed. If you notice, Congress and the Senate, they don't address these police and what they're doing. What they ultimately do all the time is push legislation to empower them even more, or
Right.
protect the cop even more, but there is nothing as far as protection for the Black community, or even addressing what's wrong between cops and the Black community. That's my observation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that obviously there needs to be legislation introduced. Here's the problem with the whole side of the legislation is the expectation of legislation that would deal with police brutality and the disproportionate rate at which unarmed Black men are being slain by police officers comes under the postulation or assumption that there are people actually in Congress that in a large enough number that are actually looking to serve the interests of the Black population. You know, we are marginalized in the sense of what we're experiencing. We are marginalized in the sense of what we're experiencing. It's just that simple. We are given crumbs and little tokens to keep us quiet and keep us settled and get us back to work and get us back to being consumers. But the truth of the matter is, we
Okay.
don't have in any uh, uh,
Dr.
mass
Wallace,
way anybody representing us.
wait, Dr. Wallace, your sound is going out just a bit.
I don't know.
Mhm.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good, good. Go ahead.
And so that's where we're at right now. Is we are in a place of uh, expecting something that the people who are capable of giving it have no intent on doing. They'll dance around it, they'll sweet talk on it, but it doesn't serve them. And so because it doesn't serve them, we are never going to get it that way. We're going to have to create a power, a foundation of economic power through which we can collectively impact and influence the behavior of people who engage us. And as long as we don't have that unity, and like I said when we talked the other day, I've mentioned this a few times recently, when J. Edgar Hoover was asked what the greatest threat to national security was, his response was Black unity, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a reason for that. And so that's where it has to start. I'm a firm believer that in that old African proverb that says, "Where there's no enemy on the outside, I mean that there's no enemy on the inside. The enemy on the outside can do no harm." And that's where we have to start. We have to start with dealing with the things we have control over and empowering ourselves that way. And so once we get to a certain point of empowerment, then we're in a position to where we can sit up and actually start placing demands on other people to start representing our interests.
Mhm.
The question I wanted to ask you, Dr. Wallace, is how are you perceived or accepted um, when you have to step in and do what you have to do? Because I always call them the enemy, and also by our own. And the other, and I also wanted to add to that is, are you? Because it ain't many of you doing this. That because you usually see these white faces. Um, and when they do call you in, I'm pretty sure it's at crisis mode. That's usually when I see our people called in to try to undo or try not. I'm gonna say undo. Sometimes I get the perception that they trying to use people like you in your position. Well, just keep them calm, that type of thing and stuff. This is a hell of a dilemma because at the end of the day, I mean, we can talk about this all day. At the end of the day, the only thing I see, I'm just being honest, we have to completely pull our children out of the schools. It's just because all you're doing at the end of the day, all we're doing is asking you, Dr. Wallace, to teach our children how to survive in a racist system. It just simply not gonna work. And our children have all the weight of the world on them. A lot of them know what's going on because when you pull them to the side and talk to them, they know what's going on. So I'm just pissed off right now. Excuse me.
Well, you're in a state that I find myself in often. I think it was James Baldwin said to be black in this country and be somewhat conscious is to be in a constant state of rage, and I find myself constantly having to hone and reel myself in. But to answer your question about how I'm perceived, uh, when it comes to the other side, the school system and the people who run it, I'm seen as a threat when I come in. But they're careful with how they deal with me because they're not going to get what they're used to with dealing with Black people. What they know about Black people and what they're used to and what they're prepared to do is deal with people who are going to get high strung, going to follow their emotions, may grab a couple of picket signs, throw a couple of fits outside the school, and get tired and go home eventually. With me, I don't lead with my emotions, and I'm very focused, and I'm aware of how things work, and I know how to get the word out. So I'm going to use what I'm good at to hold you accountable. I'm not going to come play on your ground where you're running things. I'm going to go on my ground and create a problem for you. And that's the way I do it. So they understand that. So, and the thing is, I don't pick fights that don't need to be picked either. Because if they see you coming and they know anytime they see you, it's a problem, then you lose your leverage with them because it's no win with you anyway. So they stop trying to even appease you and they just see you, well, we got to fight because here he comes. You want to send a message that if you handle what you're supposed to handle, I'm not going to be a problem today, but you're going to have to deal with this. And we deal with things on an individual level. This parent has this problem. What are you going to do about it? And you can't just throw the normal answer at me because I'm already waiting for it. So that's not going to work. And so that's that. On the other side, how my people perceive me, again, is they either don't understand me and think that what I expect or what I demand of the system is way too much. It is what it is. Or it's the complete end of the spectrum. They see me as this super safety that just can pop up and fix everything. But it's normally, like you said, at the point of crisis when it comes in front of me. And it's difficult to deal with at that time. The time to deal with it is when things are calm and you are already aware that there are going to be problems. You create an agenda, you create protocols, and you behave a certain way regardless of how you feel. That's the beautiful thing about having protocol. Protocol doesn't allow for you to enter emotion. Protocol says, when this happens, this is what you do. Mm-hmm. And we need that in every aspect and element of our existence in this country, not just education, but everywhere. It should just automatically be, when this happens, we do this. We don't have to sit up and come together and talk about, well, are we going to boycott them? Are we going to do this? No, if someone does this, this is what you do. And that goes for internal conduct as well. We need a code of conduct, a code of behavior. We need a spending agenda, a financial and economic agenda in every aspect. We need to have these protocols in place that said, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. If this happens, that happens. And then it becomes, in conditioning and training, it becomes automatic.
Dr. Wallace, why do you think our people continue to drop the ball on racism? And what I mean by that is, whenever something clearly racist happens, our people will sit around and say they can't believe it, they're shocked, they want an apology. And, you would figure after all of these centuries of the oppression that we've been through, we would kind of lose that shock factor, but it's still there. And I'm just asking you, do you think that, many people in the household are just simply not really educating their boys and girls about what racism is and how it impacts our everyday life?
We're not proactive. So no, we're not educating subsequent generations. And a great deal of us haven't been properly and adequately educated. And we have to couple that lack of knowledge with the social conditioning that we're constantly being fed. And see, I remember, with total ignorance of his policies and his record, before he ever had a chance to accumulate his policies and record, the moment that Obama was elected, I looked to a friend and I said, we got a problem. And he said, why? I said that he's going to be used as the argument that there's no longer racism in the country. And a bunch of us are going to buy into it. And that means a bunch of us are going to get blindsided when they come back and prove to us that it's still alive and kicking. And That's it. It's so much. When I say we're not proactive, we're not aggressive. What I mean by that is it's much easier for us to wish and hope that it's just working itself out and we're outgrowing it and it's getting better than it is to go out and say, I'm going to punch it in the mouth every time I see it, because it's a chance you might get punched back. And so we talk on a grand scale about revolution, but we never consider that revolution comes with struggle. And we're simply not for it. We start to think, man, what if I lose my job? Man, what if I don't get my benefits? Man, what if? And so we start looking, maybe I better get over here in this corner and sit down and mind my business. And then you think if you don't tell your kid about what is really going on out there, you're protecting them, but you're setting them up for failure. You know, if I was told once, I was told 100,000 times growing up, son, in this world, you're going to have to be 2 to 3 times better than the white man with the same credentials and same situation just to get in the door. And thankfully, they followed it up with, but guess what, son? You're that good. So you can make it. You can do it. But you're going to have to be that much better. So you may have to wake up earlier. You might have to stay later. You might have to put in the work that nobody else will do in order to show them just how good you are. But you can do it. And that's something we don't do. You know, you go out there and play. They'll tell you you're just as good, but they won't tell the kid what you're up against. So when the kid experiences it, it totally knocks them completely out the box because they're not expecting it.
Mm-hmm. Now, why do you think our people are still forgiving the evils that are done to our community? And what really blows me back is their own family, their flesh and blood will be killed out of racism, but they will still have a media show up, push a mic in their face, and through all the pain, they're saying they forgive this enemy and what they did. I mean, what can we do to break that cycle?
We're going to have to reconstruct. You know, you got some people that just totally want to abandon it altogether, but we're going to have to reconstruct religion as it pertains to the Black community, because a great deal of the idea of forgiveness with regard to anything, especially when it applies to something they've done to wrong us, because we don't show that same forgiveness with one another. We hold grudges with people in our family for years.
There's grudges on YouTube. Okay. We don't even have to turn to our family. They're on YouTube.
Oh, Lord.
Right. And so, but when it comes to them, you know, the kid walks in, I can't think of the guy's name, shot Walter Scott 5 times in the back, shot at him 8 times, 5 times in the back. His mother, I think, was in her 80s.
Oh, Lord.
And I mean, he's not even on the medical examiner's table yet. And she's talking about she forgives. Mm-hmm. And that's a constant narrative. And it goes back to slavery. Mm-hmm. You got to look at slavery. There are times in slavery where Betty is out in the field and Betty's son is snatched up. He's 4 or 5 years old and sold off the plantation. And Betty's got to pretend like she's not upset about it, because if the master or the overseer thinks she's upset, that could put her in trouble because she's a threat. So she's got to convince master that she's not mad. So this natural need to prove to white people I'm not holding a grudge can be traced back to slavery. You sold off my husband, or you whooped my husband to death. I'm okay with it. So we've learned to be okay with some of the most unbelievable atrocities committed against us. Number one is because out of fear and a need to survive, but also it was inculcated into our minds through religion.
Yeah, you know, because Walter Scott's mother did an interview and she actually started singing hymns. I was so repulsed by that. You know, I was trying to understand, but I have to tell you, I was really repulsed by that.
Yeah.
And
she turned into a minstrel show for these white folks, and it was just disgusting.
And it's conditioning. And I try to tell people all the time, I say, okay, even when you look at white evangelical Christians that are affluent and successful, watch their behavior in their religious environment and watch the behavior of poor whites and a great deal of blacks. You got one side where everything's reasonable, rational, and thought through. The other side is completely emotional.
Now, Dr. Rick, do you fault some of these pastors in these churches for this behavior?
Yes, I do. Uh, I believe that it is the responsibility of spiritual leaders, especially when pastors are the head of the most powerful mechanism within the Black community and have failed miserably at executing anything that will benefit the communities through which they thrive. And that goes to educating and empowering, to training, to the teaching of importance of generational wealth, uh, group economics. It's so many things. The Black church is designed, from the smallest to the largest, is designed to execute curriculum. They're just executing the wrong thing. See, the problem is, and we go back to what I said several minutes back when I say that the Black man doesn't get to experience power in this country at any level and not often. So when you get a Black man who becomes a pastor of a church, he's experiencing power, regardless of the size of the church. He's experiencing power. That's why you don't have the natural succession of leadership in many churches, because once a pastor gets a position, it's a position of power. He won't relinquish it. He'll be 80 years old in the pulpit. 10 Black young men, half his age, have come through with an unbelievable ability to lead, uh, unbridled imagination and creativity to take the church to the next level and the community with it. But he won't relinquish it because that's the only power he's ever experienced. Well, the same thing applies when it comes to empowering people. The more you empower people, the less they need you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got to think about, there are a lot of people out there that could do a whole lot better for the community, but it doesn't serve them individually.
Dr. Wallace, this is a question that I wanted to ask you. There's a lot of turmoil going on in the world right now, and and I can really tell that our family is waking up. They pissed off. And the question that I want to ask is, what do you see on the horizon, and what are we possibly missing? Are we going in the right direction? Are we just stagnant? Do you see any growth in us or anything like that? I just wanted to know.
I definitely see growth. It may not be in a macro sense at this particular point in time, but when you truly observe, we're actually making about face. I think that we were stagnant or maybe even regressing uh, the 50 years following the civil rights movement. I think we made a sort of a jump with the Black Panther movement, early 70s. And then when that was squelched, I think we started uh, reverting back to and going backwards. And for 50 years, we were stagnant because we were expecting uh, the vote or the Democratic Party to fix our ills. And you can see it now in the demand of Kamala Harris and Cory Booker to produce receipts that this isn't the usual Black process. Now, you still have the diehards that are defending these people, even though their record speaks to the ills of the Black community. But you've got way more people saying, no, this is not it. And you can thank social media, because social media has given voices to people who wouldn't normally have it.
Yes.
So now what used to be a sole mechanism of indoctrination through pop propaganda, which is white media, has something opposing it. Now, white media is heavily funded, so it still has a force and a power. And you talked about taking the TV away from not you, but we were talking about taking the TV away. Well, I take screen time away in my house. It's limited. You've got it for a certain period of time, whether it's your phone, whether it's your computer, whether it's the television. There's a limited amount of screen time, and it is offset with a set curriculum that I create to oppose what you've seen. First of all, I'm going to limit what you can watch, and I'm experienced enough to know that even when I select it, if it's not produced by people I know are pro-Black and are going to be unapologetically Black, I know there are still subtle messages. So I'm going to have required reading. We're going to have required discussion, and we're going to talk about these things. And what's coming out of this unapologetic Black media thing that's starting to rise. New Black media, some people are calling it. But what's coming out of it is a narrative. We are starting to tell our own story.
Mm-hmm.
And when you tell your own story, there's an old saying that says the story will always favor the hunter until the lion learns how to write. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we're at now. We've learned how to write, and more of us are learning how to write. And so the narrative is shifting, and we're starting to see an alternative truth to the truth that's being shoved down our throats. Mm-hmm. And the alternative truth is smoother. The alternative mm-hmm. truth tastes better. Why? Because it's organic, it's natural, it's true.
Yes.
And it's uplifting and it's empowering. And so I see the growth, but like I tell people all the time, what you've got to be careful of is looking for the quick fix. Mm-hmm. And we've got a lot of that over the last 50 years because we, not having experienced power, and I'm talking specifically about men, but there's some women as well, not having experienced power, we want to do something that we can get a quick result from because we need the pat on the back. Well, the problem is you can't undo 400 years of trauma overnight because the trauma is influencing the thinking. And the thinking is influencing the decision making. And so you cannot sit up and overdo it. What you have to do, and this is my belief, and I've said this I don't know how many times, we need men and women who are willing to plant seeds that they may not live long enough to see come to fruition.
True.
That can't be a need to be patted on the back and recognized as the man that fixed this. You need to sit up and plant seeds in kids and then cover them until those seeds take root. When those seeds take root, that it's there.
Yeah.
And they will act accordingly. But that takes time. The generation that will rise up is still growing up right now.
Yeah, you know, Dr. Wallace, what you're saying is true. My father has passed on, but he was the driving force in my life. And I can see now, I'm in my 50s, and I can see now, it took that long, that if he did not plant the seed in me, you would not be hearing from me, because he told me before he passed, everything that I'm going to tell you about this system, you can etch in stone. And it shows me the power of Black men planting those seeds. And that does not diminish the Black woman at all. And I can see why they try everything possible to shut down the Black man, because I often say, when you hear me talking, you're really hearing my father.
Right.
And everything. So I can see exactly what he's talking about. I'm very astute about the system. I had beat myself up because I didn't do well in school, but I'm seeing that I did need that. I did need that training, because the thing that that's a trip with all of this is basically it's like in your position, in a subtle way, they asking you to have our children to conform to this shit. And then you got to have this whole other thing going on to the side. It's just really crazy to me and stuff. And I know you have outside organizations, because that's needed for our children.
Right.
It truly does take a village. And there's so many dynamics that you may be dealing with. You may not be getting it from home. We already know what's going on with the school. So that's when you have to have your organizations in place. And I would like to hear a little bit more about what you're doing out in the field.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's pretty expansive. The thing that I'm probably most proud of being a Black man is the Black Men Lead Rite of Passage initiative, which is something that I actually developed as a response to African American adolescent and young adult male violence. That's this ongoing narrative that's being distorted and put out about Black males and young Black males and how we're perceived. And a lot of that is influencing how we're handled and treated by law enforcement, by the justice system, by the educational system, and more. And so my thing was to get an understanding of why are we behaving a certain way? Why do we have certain detrimental and dysfunctional behavior among ourselves? Why do we handle and treat and turn in all of our anger and frustration on one another? And the information and the data was out there between Dr. Joy DeGry and Dr. Howard Stevenson at the University of Pennsylvania. There was a lot of information that I started to dig into, started to break down, started to analyze and review, and then look at what ways I could take it and shape it and create a response. And the response for me is always going to be active. It's never going, I'm going to take the theory and look at it, but I want the response to be active, meaning I want to engage people and get them to act on what I believe will work to see if it works. And so I took the research and I went in and I created a curriculum that created a rite of passage for young Black males from the age of 4 to 12 coming into their own at 13 was the first part of the program. And that came from the understanding that the second most powerful influencer of whether a young Black male will commit violence or not is proper racial socialization. Are they being properly socialized into their role as males in this culture? And the vast majority are not. And those who are consistently participating in criminal behavior and violence in the community don't have proper racial socialization. Just properly socializing a kid reduces their risk of ever becoming incarcerated by five times. Just proper racial socialization, even in an environment where they're going to be hyper policed, the finger's going to be pointed at them for anything that goes wrong, they still reduce simply by knowing how to approach life based on who they are. They know who they are. They know what their community needs from them. They know what their community expects from them, starting with how you treat your women, starting with business ownership, starting with so much more. So you have that. You have the Black community empowerment initiative. And that's where we're going in and we're dealing with families who are struggling. And we're teaching them financial literacy. We're teaching them the power of group economics. You have 1,000 people in a certain area in the city, all struggling, and every last one of them are struggling alone. And you got a next door neighbor that you can connect with, and you can pool your resources and leverage that spending power to buy in bulk and to spend and to invest. And all of these things, you have your ability to build wealth within your hands, no matter how little you make. But you've got to change your thinking. So I do that, and we do, the Music is Life program, where we believe that teaching every child to play at least one instrument and to learn how to read music empowers them. It empowers their creativity, their imagination, their self-confidence. This is proven. And so we want to give them something that they can leverage for confidence, for the ability to believe in themselves and look beyond what the narrative is in their community. And so we're constantly working. There is the research side of things, which is how we get an understanding of what's going on. There is the operational side, which is where we're actually engaging boots on the ground. And and all of it means a lot to me. I am naturally a researcher, and I get excited about being able to go in and look at things and look at, man, this is what we can do. And so that's what I do. I look at it, I break it down, I consult, I ask questions, I seek the ancestors, I seek my elders, and I get answers. And I come back and I put it on paper, then I go out and I put it to work. And it's what I do. It's something that we need to do more of. We need more people involved in coming up with solutions. We need to understand the problem, absolutely, but we also need to be developing solutions that deal with the problems.
You know what? I'm glad you brought up the Black family, Dr. Wallace. A few months ago, the immigrants were being separated from their children. If you remember, at the border, they were grabbing their and separating families. And that subject matter came up on my channel. And, you know, I noticed our people were getting caught up in that story. And I was like, wait a minute, you know, we need a whole different approach to this story. We were separated going way back to chattel slavery. And we have never stopped being separated because now they use mass incarceration as a means of separating the Black family and keeping us always apart from our loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I can't take on the immigration separation, and we have not ever recovered from the separation that we have endured. You know, the mass incarceration really kicked off around the crack epidemic. And you still have those folks sitting incarcerated in jail. So we ourselves, we have never recovered from all of the separation that has happened. And it has attributed in a huge way to the dysfunction that you're looking at today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go right ahead. I'll let you answer.
Absolutely. I've literally written on serial forced displacement, which is just one way that the Black family is being separated and destroyed. You go back to chattel slavery, and like you said, it was common practice to sell off children and husbands and wives, fracturing families over and over again. In fact, it was done on purpose. They didn't want Black men bonding because what they found is if you allow the Black man to bond with his progeny, he will die for the progeny. So it was common that either the kid or the man had to go. And so you saw this consistently. And then you go into the 60s and you start to look at, there's a report called The Negro Family, a Case for National Action, that was written by Daniel Patrick Moynihan. It's become affectionately known as the Moynihan Report. And one of the things that Moynihan consistently talked about was the way that the government was dealing with poverty in the community, the Black community, and the ignoring or the ignorance to the fact that slavery had a massive psychological impact on Blacks, and that needed to be considered. And it was presented to the Democratic administration at the time that Johnson was heading it. It was after the assassination of Kennedy, and Johnson was heading it. And what you get is Moynihan saying, rather than sitting up and creating all of these social programs, you know, that we're going to give to Black women and children and say, we'll do this. How about taking that same money, the millions and millions that we're going to use, invested in creating government jobs for Black men, and let Black men take care of their families? And he told them what would happen if they didn't do it that way. And they chose to do the social program, which was, again, a way of thrusting a wedge between the Black male and the Black woman and Black children. And I'm not in any way relieving the Black man of responsibility, but we've got to be aware of the mechanisms and how they play out. And so when you look at what was going on at the border, there's a lot that you have to address there. First and foremost, we've been conditioned to be the savior for everybody except ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
We have to jump on every fight. We fighting the LGBT communities fight. We fighting the Latino fight. We fighting the south of the border fight, and won't fight for ourselves.
Yes.
And that speaks volume. Number one is, when you sit up and you start to defend the immigration issue, or the right to immigrate, and the breaking up of families, have you actually sit down and understood and studied what it means to have immigrants coming in when you haven't yet gained a footing socioeconomically in the country? True. Do you know what that means for you and your people? We have no sense of self-preservation when it comes to that. And that's something that's got to be trained and inculcated into the minds of young youth. You've got to sit up and say, think about it. When you're on a plane and you're getting ready to take off, and the flight attendant is sitting up at the front of the plane, and she's giving you the whole spiel about everything that can happen. If the cabin should depressurize, these masks will fall down. First thing you do, adults, first thing they tell you, adults are those people who are completely physically healthy. The first thing you do is put your mask on first. Make sure it's on secure. Then put your child's mask on. Why is that? Because if while you're putting your child's mask on, you lose consciousness, your child is now left to fend for themselves. Both of you might be out of there. But if you take care of the person most capable of protecting, saving, fighting for, and covering the child is still 100% functional. That's self-preservation. You cannot help someone else until you saved yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we don't train what we don't train ourselves, our kids. We fighting everybody else's back. Oh my God, that just broke my heart. I don't wish anybody harm, but I can't come fight for you if my house is sinking.
Yes. Right.
And so that's what we've got to work on.
Yeah, we definitely we have already demonstrated to the world who and what we are, and we need to focus on ourselves. Dr. Wallace, I have had first hand knowledge at like real time. I worked in the construction field for many years and have literally seen Black men show up to work and be laid off within an hour. And then I see all these Mexicans come in, and the way that they would work, they literally would like work frantically and in fear. And I have told many a sister, don't think our Black men are not willing to work. I've seen this. This is the only work I've ever done, and I've seen it with my own eyes. And these brothers are skilled in many different trades, and just because of his sheer existence, I'm seeing him get laid off. I mean, when I first got in the field, I was doing a lot of crying, and my father said, "You're just gonna have to suck these tears up. This is just what you're having to deal with." Um, and it made me very, very angry, but it made me fully understand the plight of the Black man, that in this system, the enemy is working overtime to try to stop the Black man from feeding um, their family. But we have also seen, there's something that Lisa had brought up that was deep to me, was that last summer we seen a barrage of phone calls on Black people doing anything. But the one that stood out to me the most is when this young boy, he started his own little lawn care business, and they started that down. And Lisa said, well, damn, they don't even want us to work. They talk all that crap, but then when you go out and do it on your own, and you ain't asking nobody for nothing, they want to swat that down too. And I just, that ain't even like a question. I'm just ranting right now because I'm pissed off about everything that you're saying. So give me.
But I can elaborate on it because it's steeped in history. It's not new. If you go back to slavery, and you go to the 12 years after slavery, known as Reconstruction, and you start to study it, you find a lot. First and foremost, people talk about Reconstruction all the time and really don't understand it. And I wrote a paper that suggested that the South didn't lose the war, and people thought I was crazy. I said, let's look at it again. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and you tell me if the South won, if the South lost the war, why are we dealing with this particular thing? Okay, in 1963, when we were free, there was a ratification of the 13th Amendment, and that talked about slavery, and supposedly we were given the rights to a certain extent of citizens. And we know for a fact, because Blacks actually practiced it, that Blacks had the right to vote. Okay, why in 1963 are we fighting now for voting rights in the South? And I posed a number of different questions that spoke of that. And then I go back and I talk about the fact that this is what happened. Reconstruction was this: the South surrendered. Its president surrendered and was thrown in jail. The general surrendered, and supposedly the South lost. But this is what happened afterwards, the 12 years following. For the next 12 years, clandestine groups like the Ku Klux Klan and other organizations rode by, bombed, shot up, burned Northern Union military installations in the South, to the point that the cost was becoming too great, and the Union and the North pulled out of the South. At that time, they started to rebuild and return things to the way they were. And what they agreed not to do was to try to secede away from the Union again. And pretty much the North let them do what they wanted to do. That's why you still have statues of all of the Confederate generals and aristocrats all around that we're still fighting over. That's why they're still flying the Confederate flag, because they know they won up until 1963. Even though federally you had the right to vote, they came up with so many different things to stop you. You had to get a Civil Rights Act that says you have a right to show up and vote. And that's because that happened. Now, what you look at when you start talking about black men not having work, a black man with an income is an empowered man. The only way that you can break a black man is economically. You can't break his spirit. You can break his spirit through his economics. And here's how. It's not that he doesn't have money that breaks him. It's that he can't provide for his woman. And you use that same reality to create the gulf between the black man and the black woman that separated the black family, that destroyed the institution through which young black children would be educated and empowered to rise up and show you what they were really made of. And so that's constant. You can't employ, even when this whole thing with Monahan went on, when you start to see a time when it went from the vast majority of black kids being born into two-parent households, and you start to see the decline. Well, the thing is, that was during a time where that was a 50% unemployment rate for black men. And even right now, the black man is still the most underemployed and underpaid person in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And there's a reason for that. See, we will give your women jobs. We will let them matriculate to institutions of higher education in large numbers, because we understand, though they are gifted spiritually, intellectually, and exceptional, without a covering to provide them with an environment in which they feel secure, they cannot rise up on their own. The black man is the protector. And if we can keep him broken, and that's what they did. You got a black man in a house that can't pay the bills. And guess what happened during that time when social programs start to rise and you start to see the separation of the black family, with the black man leaving the home? This is what happened. Back then, when a social worker showed up at your home to talk about how they were going to help you with this program and that program and that program, they didn't talk to the man. They talked to the woman, and it was usually a woman that showed up to the house, sit down at the table, and talked out the future of the family without involving the man.
Mm-hmm. A white woman.
Yeah.
A white woman telling your black wife what the government could do for her, and she didn't need you.
Right. And they didn't do that to any other woman. And I can tell you, I saw white people around me on welfare, and the man was right there in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I saw Hispanics on welfare. The man was right there in the house. The only one they had an objection to being in that household was the black man.
Yeah. We had to go hide our men, huh? Let's go figure.
And see, that's the thing. And I say that this is something else I say often, that we will only get as high as our women are able to lift us emotionally and spiritually. And we will only get as far as our black men can lead us physically. And if we can cripple black men on a large scale, the black population will remain stagnant no matter how gifted they are. Mm-hmm. And that's where we're at right now. We've got to get to the point to where we understand that we need to empower the black man. We need to provide an environment where the black man can prosper. The system is never going to provide that, because it does not serve the system for the black man to be empowered.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Now, I also see you have some books on health. And I think this is really important because you know the things that the Black community suffers from. We have the high blood pressure, the heart disease, and actually a lot of dementia and Alzheimer's is also in the Black community. Um, and one thing we have to accept the fact that this American diet that is pushed in this country is not healthy. And in fact, it's toxic for us when you
Exactly.
see what it's doing to us physically. What do you have to say about that?
I mean, there's so much to be said about proper diet, proper nutritional intake. As a matter of fact, the first business I ever started was a business that dealt with health and fitness, and I've evolved more into the holistic and homeopathic side of things. And that's the way I deal with it. I treat everything that I deal with when I deal with something, which is rare. I treat it holistically. I treat it organically. I don't take medication because I don't want synthetic material in my body. It's not designed to process it. But when you look at it, you got to understand the diet of the slave was a death diet.
Oh, Lord, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we start because it's what we ate, we brought it into the culture and we still praise it, we still look at it, and we don't understand the benefits. And the thing that you have to understand is you need a minimal understanding or a minimal perspicacity of how your diet impacts your life. And you need to understand that so you know how to eat and why this isn't good to eat or that isn't good to eat and why you need a certain amount of this.
Dr. Wallace, you know what's so funny? When I was a child growing up, I grew up in the city of Philadelphia. I kid you not. I remember walking home from school and I would be damn near 2 blocks away from where I lived and could smell the chitlins cooking.
Yeah.
Somebody on the street making chitlins. And they thought that was a good thing. They were having chitlins for dinner. And, when I think back, I'm like, oh my goodness, the things that we used to eat and thought was great. But I used to even tell my mom, if I can smell the stench of that 2 blocks away before I get here, something is wrong.
Very wrong. Yeah.
Very wrong. And you got to think that any part of the pig is a problem because it doesn't have pores to sweat. I mean, meat is a question anyway. I am not a vegan, but I believe in a plant-based diet, and I believe that if you're going to eat meat, I primarily eat certain seafoods, and even that with the high mercury content in the oceans now is dead. Is probably deadly. But the thing is, when you look at stuff that comes from the pig, but not just the pig. I laugh at people who sit up and talk about eating rats if you go to a Chinese buffet, but eat a possum. And or a coon, a raccoon. And I'm like, okay, you'll eat the raccoon, the possum, and the squirrel. Let's not forget the squirrel and the rabbit. But you don't want to eat the rat. I mean, they are rodents.
Yeah, they sure is.
So you only dislike one kind of rodent. And of course they get mad at me. My thing is, the more I look at it, the more I mean, it's hard to get me, I don't eat fried foods anymore. Maybe on occasion somebody does something, whatever, maybe. But another thing I don't do is I don't hardly eat chicken because of everything I've learned about that. And so what happens is the problem with educating yourself is you start looking and going, man, all of the stuff that I've been loving is not good.
Yeah.
And but see, the thing is, what you have to also understand though is there is a multi-billion-dollar industry in you being ill. And so, you've got all of these different things that they keep putting out there. And from fast food to just poor eating. And then not only are you eating stuff you shouldn't be eating, you're not eating anywhere close to what you should be. I mean, it's so many different things, but from a health perspective, it comes from knowledge, it comes from awareness, but it also comes from a commitment to being better. One of the things when I'm doing my meditation in the morning, a part of the meditation that I repeat, that I actually recite, there's a line that says that my body is pure spirit, and the spirit from which my body is created is perfect. Therefore, my body is perfect. Now, what that does is that places a demand on my subconscious to make sure that my body is perfect. That means working out in the gym, eating properly, and it convicts. You know what you ate yesterday, Rick. You're negatively impacting that perfect body, guy. I'm like, oh, and so, but it's being aware and challenging yourself to be better. Nobody, I'm not saying be perfect, but what I am saying is there are some things you just absolutely need to let go of. Because most of the stuff that we talked about, coronary heart disease, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, all are treatable through natural means.
Sure is.
And yet that's what's killing us.
Hey, Dr. Wallace, what I want to do is, as you continue to talk, I'm going to share this screen so I can show the family the books that you have put together. You wrote a lot of books. I ain't even got them all, but I'm determined to get them as we I'm gonna put the links after this video upload, and then put it. But I wanted to at least present that.
Okay.
And then, because I was astounded when we had talked behind the scenes, and I wanted to do more research about you. That I done lost my way here. Oh, here we go. Um, that and I did put this link here of smash words so people could learn more about you. But the books, and these ain't all the books. And Dr. Wallace does get involved in let me go up a little further. I don't know if y'all can see it. I might have to enhance okay, hopefully y'all can see it. What stood out to me was when I seen 10 herbs and spices you go much deeper. And these ain't all the books, my royal family. This is not all the books, but y'all do have the links to this. And Dr. Wallace, the question I want to ask is, how are you writing all these books and doing all this stuff? Do you ever have time to rest?
Actually, I do. I make it a point to rest. I get a full night's sleep. I literally construct my day. I'm up every morning around 4 or 5, but I'm in the bed in time enough that when I wake up, I put in a minimum of 7 hours. And right around there, I would normally wake up right at the end of a sleep cycle. Uh, it just works out that way. I go to bed so that I get up right at the end of a sleep cycle. So I wake up refreshed and ready to go. And I teach my clients that it's real important that you know how your body and your brain functions. When you go to sleep, you go into cycles that last anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. And then you cycle into another cycle. And then right around 7 hours, right around 5 hours, 5.5 hours, you start to, your brain starts to prepare you to wake up. So that last hour and a half to 2 hours is your brain preparing you to wake up. That's why it's not good to hit the snooze button. Because when you hit the snooze button, if you fall back to sleep, you start the cycles over again. But 9 minutes later, it's going to go off again and wake you up. That's why it seems the more you hit the snooze button, the sleepier and more foggy you are, because you're trying to reintroduce yourself to a sleep cycle that you never get to complete. Mm-hmm. And so I make sure I just sculpt everything. There's time for family in every day. There's time for family, especially, and every week there's a specific time set aside for my wife that no matter what, we're going to have date day and date night. We both love movies, so we do movies during the day and we go somewhere that we choose at night. So I do all of that. How I do what I do as far as writing books is I spend a lot of time learning what I know. And as I learn it, I write it. I'm sitting around looking and I probably got 30 journals within my reach that's just loaded with things and thoughts as well as stuff I study. And it's all there. So when I get ready to sit down and write, I write by chapter and I can literally do a chapter in a day. So what might happen is I've got 2 books that I'm going to put out this year, and it'll probably take me a maximum of 90 days for each book. Now, obviously, we'll have to do content, uh, do the proofing, and then we'll do the content editing and the designs and all that. The designs, most of the designs I do myself, and everything like that, and I'll do that, and that may maybe take a week, and everything like that. But within 90 days, a good book, like the last book I wrote was Critical Mass. I don't think it's on that list because I did it through my own publishing company. I didn't go through Smashwords. And when I wrote that book, it's 23 chapters and then an entire section from a religious perspective in a way that people who are religious can understand it. And I did that book probably in 4 months. And it's, like I said, 400 and something pages. And it's just when I write, out, with the exception of talking, writing is the second thing I do best. And, my grandmother would say, my God, he doesn't shut up. and I mean, and you probably read it in the bio.
Yes.
Where, that was just me. I was very precocious, but I was also very loquacious. I talked. And my grandmother would say the only time this kid would cry is when I would tell him to shut up. And so just say, go ahead and talk, but just go somewhere else and talk. And so that comes easy. I've been speaking in the public since I was 3. But then I developed, because I love to read, I developed a love for writing. And so the writing of the books is just it's actually my escape. And so it's not hard at all.
Okay. All right. Well, the other thing is your organization that you have, you need funding because I'm always over there listening to you. And we have put the link out to that. And you need support too, as well, Dr. Wallace. You are doing a lot for the community. And it's a thankless job. I know it is. But we have to do with reality too, as well. So I'm going to make sure that the link is there for anybody to donate to um, what you call that, the Odyssey Project again,
Right.
Dr. Wallace? Yes.
The Odyssey Project is the parent company or the parent organization, better, for Black Men Lead, the Black Community Empowerment Initiative, Music is Life. All of that falls under the Odyssey Project, which is simply putting in work in the Black community to help elevate the people within the community.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So you'll have that there, and the links are being put around. But like I said, all the links will be there because we are going to put this interview on our personal channels too, as well. And you need support. I've been hearing you. I really been hearing you and stuff.
Right.
And I know it's not easy. It's only so much that you can do and stuff. You have anything else, Lisa Cabrera? It's on your mind? Did she step away?
No. I mean, I want to thank Dr. Wallace for taking his time out to be here. This has really been a great interview.
You really have, yeah. I've learned a lot. Yeah, I've learned a lot, and appreciate you. And we're gonna get your name out there because I have a feeling, because we know what we're on, is that one thing that I have learned about being when I got on YouTube is I had to go find my people. I literally had to go find them. It was like I was digging, and I found Tommy, and I didn't even try to find him. He was just there, and it ain't easy. And I'm looking at the amount of subscribers that you have. A lot of people know you in the community, so I get the impression that they're suppressing his information because you're coming positive and it's an empowerment for our Black families and stuff like that. So that's part of our duty and responsibility to get your name out. I'm asking everyone to share wherever you share. I don't care where you share it, because that's our duty and our responsibility. I don't really like depending on the system for um, anything. We have to have you back, Dr. Wallace. You
I would definitely enjoy coming back. That, like I said, there's so much to talk about, and so much work that needs to be done. Uh, and so I would love to come back. You just tell me when.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe we have to just focus on one particular subject. It's different than that, because I know you. I mean, you're even working with adults too as well. You
Yeah.
know,
Oh yeah.
not
We
just
deal
children.
right. We deal with adults on a lot of different issues: domestic violence, childhood sexual abuse. After the fact. My wife also counsels. She's a molestation and rape survivor. We actually met when I counseled her. She went off and did her own thing. We came back together a couple of years later, and I loved what she had become, and I told her she was going to be my wife. We didn't date. I looked at her. I already knew who she was when I was counseling her, but she came to me in a professional capacity, so I treated it as such. And then I stepped back. She went off. When she came back, she had written her book, Ghetto's Forgotten Daughters. We talked a little bit. After about a couple of conversations, I said, let me just put it out there. Look, you're my wife. We're going to get married. A year later, we were married, and the rest is history. But she's working with girls. She does it inside of the system by working with teenagers who are in the juvenile justice system. She does it with individuals who are adults. And I still do it on the same thing. So we have that, and there's so much going on in the adult community. Even with the Black Men League, we have the rite of passage, which is to 12 and moving into 13. But we deal with post-pubescent adolescents. We deal with young adults all the way up to the age of 30. So it's a full-blown assault on the marginalization of our people.
Oh yes, it is. Y'all are a power couple, because I'm over there on Facebook, and I see the other stuff that's going on that y'all doing over there too as well. So I've been well versed on what you and your wife is doing and stuff. Greatly appreciate you, Dr. Wallace. Really, really
And I
do.
appreciate you having me.
Mm-hmm. So that comes to the conclusion of this interview, my royal family. I thank y'all for your participation. Oh my goodness, I'm tongue tied today. I can't say it, Lisa. Oh,
Your
that's out on the spot.
It's okay.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So y'all know what I usually do. I love closing out with just a little bit of music. Um, I like to start with music. I like to close out with music and stuff. And I thank everybody for their support. So let's play a little bit of that, a little bit of this.